For those of you who don't know, but I also feature sarcastic commentary on my Patreon, which isn't posted anywhere else. I thought that it would be fun to highlight the top snark from every single day as an incentive to get people to join. As I mentioned last month, I finished the end of the book on the last day of March, so I began April with Chapter 1 of Defy Me. I can't say that I've ever taken note of that, but I feel like it's something to celebrate. I did take a couple of days off at the start of the month because my fiancé promised that we'd go on vacation. I thought that we'd try to go again later in the month after that was cancelled, but his own family was too busy and it never happened, which, whatever, I needed a break regardless, I suppose. I moved on to Infraction, which I somehow finished with 1 day of the month to spare, which meant that I started in on Imagine Me for just 1 day this month. This single paragraph somehow manages to give more shirts about these forgotten background characters than Juliet or Warner did in the entire previous book. To be fair, little girls don't cause immense earthquakes and turn people's skin inside out, so as far as Juliet literally disappearing from Kenji's arms, this almost seems par for the course. Gee, I can't possibly imagine why Juliet would have changed. I mean, it's not like she watched hundreds of people get unalived, continue to lose control over her powers over and over again, was forced to unalive a man just to survive. Nope, all of those are perfectly ordinary everyday things that in no way would scar anybody's psyche. Literally, not one person in this entire series treats Juliet like she's a person. Warner and Adam view her as, ooh, girlfriend material, ooh. The Reestablishment and Castle view her as this weapon to be used for their own gains. She isn't human to them. She's a weapon. She's a sex object. I'm not even quite sure what to call how Nazira seems to think that Juliet is just going to slip back into her role of Ella and be her childhood friend again. But for Juliet's biological parents who have seemingly kidnapped their child are holding her hostage and keep referring to her as Ella, I hope I don't have to explain to you why this sounds like an episode of Criminal Minds. So you know how Juliet was kidnapped by a man and woman who have become detached from reality to the point where they think that Juliet is their missing 5-year-old daughter? Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. Hey, how would you like to hear about how Ian was relentlessly teasing Kenji about hooking up with Nazir instead? Is that something that is of interest to anybody? You watched and said nothing as Anderson tortured his own children, didn't you? That's what you're going to go with? Child abuse? That's where she's drawing the line? Anderson took over the entire forking world and murdered how many people, and she's going after Delu for standing by as Anderson beat Warner? Jesus, Anderson said. The reestablishment. We're going to get rid of all organized religion. Also the reestablishment leader for North America. I'll take the Lord's name in vain. The thing that I think even the author failed to consider is that they have technology to literally erase people's minds. And considering that psychologists were messing around with this psychological trick in the 1980s, it's honestly not that hard for me to consider them implanting false memories into Juliet to make her think that she's actually Ella. Is she having her own memories, or is she just turning into what Evie wants her to believe she is? You guys wanted to see 7 gosh darn pages of Warner being psychologically tortured in an isolation chamber and slowly being starved to death, didn't you? If not, then too darn bad! This is what we're getting! The problem that I have with this is this huge difference between happy family doing ordinary things and parents who literally give no shirts about their children that they literally sell the children to Nazis. I hope I don't have to tell you that loving, caring parents do not sell their children to Nazis. Oh gee, it's almost like keeping somebody in a glass tube full of water for more than a decade is detrimental to somebody's physical health. If only there was somebody who could have predicted that. Oh wait, everybody with more than 2 IQ points could have foreseen this. Kenji then finds her. I guess their entire plan was run around New Zealand and hope for the best. Which, doesn't sound great. Like, literally not at all. I should have done more research on the reestablishment. I should have read up on its history and my history within it. I should have learned more about the Supreme Commanders. I should have been better prepared. Ah yes, the organization that is actively 1984ing books for sure keeps a library open in every sector that is full of impartial narration about the reestablishment's rise to power as well as the unbiased biographies about each of the leaders. 99.9% of why she failed so badly fell on people like Warner, Kenji, Castle, and Delegate. They know that they were intentionally withholding important information that she needed, but they literally never bothered to tell her any of it. And despite this being the first time she's mentioned it, I'm already over her blaming herself. Romeo Must Die, Bad Boys, Rush Hour 2, Rush Hour 3. Actually, Rush Hour 3 wasn't that great. Tangled, The fact that Kenji knows all of this information only just highlights just how forked up that this timeline is. Friendly reminder that the reestablishment came into power and took over the entire forking world in less than 6 years. Don't forking tell me that Emma's powers didn't have a role in any of this. That's bullshit that everybody would just roll over and accept this with literally zero questions. Sector 45 has been returned to its original state as a prison. So those soldiers who were so eager to join forces with the OP people, they've once again been turned into simpering fools for the reestablishment? Is that what I'm reading here? Literally, not one independent thought exists outside of the named characters. These soldiers and the civilians might as well be rocks and grass for all that they matter to the plot. Which, wow, what a forking gosh darn letdown. Like, I was already not expecting much from this book, yet I'm somehow still angry at how much was literally not covered here. They are apparently literally the only two people in the entire forking hospital. Not one single nurse running to check on Delilah, not a doctor ordering Nathan to get the fork out from her room, nothing. Need I remind you that Delilah literally just woke up following a bad car accident? I get it, but exactly what part of "leave me the fork alone" is difficult for Nathan to understand. This isn't romantic, it's forking creepy how he's constantly disregarding literally anything that Delilah wants. Wait. So the reason why Delilah didn't go to her therapy sessions is because she thinks that her doctor is pulling a satanic panic memory implanting bullshit on her? Are you going to talk about this, or are we just going to dive deeper into how Nate just disrespects Delilah's boundaries and the narration calls it romantic? So, where exactly are Caroline and Drew? If they're at work, then why isn't Nathan? Delilah was literally in the psych ward for 3 days and she went back to work literally hours after getting discharged. Why the hell is Nate taking time off to care for Delilah when she's pointedly asked him not to? And why the hell is this near stranger staying with Delilah instead of literally anybody else? She honestly thinks that Nate going against every single one of her wishes is actually them making progress. She thinks this simply because he told her that he loved her. Yeah, I know what you mean, and to an extent, things are lighter. We're both trying, but it's rough. I've never felt so much love for someone. It's disorienting. Aaron shrugged her shoulders. That's love. Maybe it's just because I've never been in such a shirty, toxic, abusive, romantic relationship before, but I don't really see how anybody could look at Nate violently throwing a wine glass and say, so romantic. I love him so much. Delilah randomly thinks that Nate is now 100% over Grace's death, even though that's not how forking grief works. You don't just wake up one morning and you're like, Grace who? Always touching, the physical dependence we had on one another was staggering at times. Coming from Delilah's abusive background, this sounds the exact opposite of healthy. It's like she swung from one extreme to the other without learning how to cope on her own. I don't know what he hoped to accomplish by going after her all of these years later. Like he's screaming at her about how she ruined his life because colleges don't want people like him around and it's hard to get a job when you have a record. Did he want to be arrested for battery and attempted rape? Because it's going to be even harder to do anything with those on his record on top of whatever other crimes he's already committed. I'm still baffled over the idea that this guy was just walking around and being in society. This man had so much hate in his heart, and you know that it wasn't just about Delilah. There were probably other victims of his. Probably women that he'd somehow conned into joining him in bed, and then he'd turn around and beat the shirt out of them too. Anyway, this is insanely upsetting to Delilah and she has an intense panic attack. Nate ends up doing a weird mouth-to-mouth thing in order to shove her anti-anxiety medication down her throat. I usually wrap it in a piece of cheese and rub the throat until they swallow, but you do you. Looking at this from an objective adult standpoint, I can tell you that the warning signs were there. Something tells me that if Juliet cares to examine her happy childhood memories closer, she'd find that they weren't nearly half as happy as she's thinking that they are. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, you can read the entire snark in full context on my Patreon for $1 a month. Come back next month for more out of context comments.